Let's go to the Bears. We talked about them a little bit yesterday. You have some more intel on what the thought is behind the scenes as to what Chicago is going to do with quarterback Justin Fields and how that might end up playing out in the number 1 overall pick.
Well, I really get the sense, and I said this on the podcast, and I urge everybody, if you can, listen to the podcast, write a review. Femi had to sit there, and he had to listen to this. Tears were coming down his eye as I was describing this. But I do think there's a sense that the Bears feel like Fields can't throw it well enough. And for them to get where they have to go, they need more from the quarterback. And they do like Bryce Young in this draft. Do they like C.J. Stroud? I don't know. I don't know if anybody loves anyone yet because they haven't really spent time around the kids. You know, a lot of this about becoming a franchise quarterback really centers on the leadership, the character, the work habits. And those are things that you hear about, but you don't really know until you spend time around the kid. And I think that's going to take us through the next 6 weeks until we get to the draft, till we learn that, and we'll find that out. But the sense I get from the Bears, who've watched practice, who have tried to develop their offense, is he struggles to throw the ball consistently enough to where they feel like they can win the game. And if that's the case, they have an obligation to the franchise to compare him to the quarterbacks out there. It's what you have to do. It's part of your job. I mean, you know, I know the Chiefs don't have to do it because they got Patrick Mahomes. But when you don't have that elite player at the position, you got to compare what's in the draft to what there's out there. So I think that's what they'll do. If they like Bryce Young, then they've got to figure out how can we maximize value for Justin Fields. Mm-hmm. And I think that's the process they're going through. Do I think they're calling teams saying, hey, Justin Fields is available? No, I don't. I think what they're doing is they're talking to a lot of teams trying to get them to ask if Justin Fields is available.
Yeah, and look, we still have...
It's a different story.
Right, over 2 months till the draft. So there's a lot of different angles in how this will play out. Combine next week, then you'll have the pro days into early mid-March. After that, then the draft into April. The one big movement as far as the odds board from the quarterback perspective, this impacts both first quarterback taken and first overall pick. It's while our assumption was it would be between Bryce Young out of Alabama, C.J. Stroud of Ohio State. Well, now there's the momentum for Anthony Richardson, who in a lot of markets has surpassed Will Levis on the odds board, who is now up from 4th to 3rd. Anthony Richardson, the dual threat Florida quarterback, who had a struggling final year for the Gators. They only went 6-6, but a guy who can do multiple things, especially with his legs. And some of the highlights from him extending plays with the feet were spectacular this past season. At BetMGM, he's all the way down to 7-1 after being 40-1 to go first overall Monday. Now opened 100-1. How much of that is based on one CBS Sports mock draft, Michael, that came out yesterday that had Richardson number 1? And how much of that is actually real from what you've heard on Richardson's stock so far?
Well, I think a lot of these books don't rely on one source, right? I think they have more than one source. And they're in the information business just like I'm in the information business and you're in the information business. This is why a lot of sports books were trying to hire the Wojs and the Schefters, because that information coming to them first allows them to recalibrate the line. It's no different than the stock market. If you know a company is going to purchase another company, you try to get in there before. I'm not saying it's insider trading, but what I'm saying is knowledge is power. And so somebody is saying a lot of positive things around the NFL about Richardson. And you can say that. You can certainly say that. He's big. He's got Cam Newton-like size. He's strong. He can throw the ball from here to wherever. But he doesn't play to the level of his talent all the time. You can watch a highlight tape of him and think, wow, that guy's really good. But you could also watch the game tape and say there's too much inconsistencies. Now, the question you've got to answer is, can we improve on those inconsistencies? Can we make him a better player? Because talent, dangling the talent in front of teams is always going to drive value up. Remember, E.J. Manuel went, 14th overall in the draft from Florida State. He was not as talented. He was inaccurate. He had no sense of timing, but he could throw the ball far, and he could make some plays. Poor Lamar Jackson had to sit there for 31 picks. He won the Heisman. Lamar Jackson's a better collegiate player than Anthony Richardson is. But the game's a little different today than when Lamar was sitting in that green room 3 years ago or 5 years ago.
Right.
Right? So it's a little bit the six-back offense that teams see. You know, maybe you do need a 6'4", 240-pound man playing quarterback for you. And maybe we could work this. I mean, the Jalen Hurts factor is going to affect the quarterback market.
It's no secret, too, that the books have been hammered by no other sport more noticeably than the NFL draft over the past few seasons because of how the information is so much more evenly spread out and distributed if you're comparing it to sports books versus just average bettors. As much as Anthony Richardson fits that bill of being a multidimensional threat who could lead a six-back offense, isn't there some irony there in looking at you compare what the Bears are thinking about potentially giving up or getting value for in Justin Fields, who is a very underdeveloped passer but a great runner of the football. You compare that to Anthony Richardson, who is a extremely, extremely underdeveloped passer of the football, while still being an elite runner. I mean, look at some of the game logs for Richardson. 9-27 against Florida State last year, 11-23 against South Carolina. The guy showed no ability to show any sort of consistency. And that's where it's funny to me, Michael, as much as he's a really good, I like him as a prospect, is it really enough to say, okay, number one overall, and to a team like the Bears, who already have the same issue with their quarterback?
I mean, look, you're talking to a guy. I was recommending Anthony Richardson for the Heisman as a value play. I thought this kid's talented enough to go out with Billy Napier as his head coach, that if he develops with Napier, he could win the Heisman. And I think when you watched, the Utah game, it looked like he had a chance. And then next week, he didn't look so good. So I see the talent. I see exactly what you see, too, is the enormous inconsistencies. But when you're in a draft, you know, there's four kind of scouts, Ben, and they all begin with the letter P. So the first kind of scout is just a poor scout. He can't see talent. The second kind of scout is the picker, and they pick on one thing the guy can't do, just picks on that constantly. The third kind of scout is the guy who just grades production. Will Levis does this. Will Levis does that. It's just all production. But the greatest scout of all is the guy who can project the talent forward. And that's where I think this is where some people, and it's only going to have to come from coaches, not from scouts. Some coach is going to have to project this talent forward and buy into it. Because I've known this from being in the league. If I like Anthony Richardson's talent and the quarterback coach or the offensive coordinator doesn't like him, I'm dead. They're not going to coach him. They're not going to make him player.
There were the moments for Richardson, that season opener, upset win, 29-26 over Utah at the Swamp. Richardson was unbelievable. I mean, 17-24, also rushed for 3 touchdowns and 106 yards. Then the 2 games after that, 24-53, no touchdowns, 4 picks. And that was kind of his season in a nutshell. But you know that the buzz and the hype is there, and there's a lot of things to like about Richardson.
Go to VSiN.com/subscribe to become a VSiN Pro subscriber today.